An intensifying geopolitical shift has emerged in the last 24 hours as Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived in Beijing for a high-stakes state visit, contrasting sharply with rhetoric from Washington. While US President Donald Trump publicly dismissed the economic necessity of the bilateral relationship with Canada, claiming the United States does not require Canadian products or automotive manufacturing, Carney was met with a full state ceremony and red carpet reception at Beijing Capital International Airport. This visit marks the first time a Canadian Prime Minister has set foot in China in 8 years, signaling a significant departure from nearly a decade of cooled relations. The diplomatic choreography in Beijing suggests a calculated strategic pivot by the Chinese leadership. Observers note that Carney's arrival was not a routine diplomatic request, but the result of a direct personal invitation from President Xi Jinping following discussions in the fall of 2025 involving Carney and Premier Li Qiang. The presence of senior Chinese officials on the tarmac, rather than mid-level protocol staff, indicates that Beijing is treating this engagement with the level of importance typically reserved for major global powers. This high-level reception occurred almost simultaneously with President Trump's statements to reporters in Washington, where he characterized Canada as irrelevant to American economic interests. The timing of these two events highlights a growing divergence in North American foreign policy and trade strategy. While the White House appears to be signaling a move toward greater isolationism and domestic-focused production, the Canadian government is actively exploring alternative global partnerships. This split-screen reality presents a challenge to the traditional assumption of North American economic unity. As Washington projects an image of indifference toward its northern neighbor, Beijing's decision to execute a precision state welcome serves as a calculated countermessage to a global audience, setting the stage for a structural shift in the architecture of international power. The central focus of the discussions in Beijing extends beyond traditional trade commodities like canola and pork, reaching into the foundational structures of North American industrial policy. Reports from within the delegation indicate that the core of the negotiations involves a fundamental challenge to the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. While President Trump has publicly asserted that Canada is the primary beneficiary of the deal and has characterized the agreement as optional for the United States, internal sources in Washington's trade offices suggest growing concern over Canada's potential to develop autonomous industrial corridors. This shift is centered on the automotive sector, specifically the manufacturing of electric vehicles and the associated battery supply chains. The strategic details of the Beijing summit involve the potential for Chinese state-affiliated manufacturers to establish production facilities on Canadian soil. According to industry analysts and trade law specialists, such a move would not merely be an investment in the Canadian market, but a structural maneuver to utilize Canadian labor content and supply chain credentials. Under specific interpretations of current trade frameworks, vehicles produced in Canada with Chinese affiliation could technically qualify as North American products. This would allow these goods to cross the United States border under existing trade documentation, potentially bypassing direct tariffs currently aimed at Chinese exports. The implementation of even a single provision allowing Chinese-affiliated manufacturers to meet North American content thresholds would redraw the competitive landscape for the American automotive industry in a manner not seen since the 1980s. Data regarding the scale of these proposed investments suggest a massive influx of infrastructure and manufacturing capital. This includes not only assembly plants, but also the development of lithium processing and critical mineral extraction sites within Canada. The economic pressure this places on the traditional Big Three automakers in Detroit is substantial, as they are currently managing a costly transition to electric platforms while facing higher cost structures than their Chinese counterparts. For the Canadian government, the negotiation represents an attempt to dismantle the long-standing assumption that the United States market is the only viable destination for its industrial output. By engaging directly with the world's second-largest economy on manufacturing integration, Ottawa is signaling a willingness to leverage its geography and resources to secure a new role in the global supply chain, regardless of the rhetoric emanating from Washington. The long-term consequences of the Beijing summit are projected to manifest across the Canadian agricultural and industrial heartlands, with direct implications for the G7 and Five Eyes alliance structures. In Saskatchewan, the potential easing of Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola, which have historically strained farming margins, represents a critical shift for producers currently facing financial uncertainty. Analysts indicate that even a partial resolution of these agricultural trade barriers could stabilize the sector within a single harvest cycle. Simultaneously, the focus on the automotive corridor in southern Ontario, including Windsor and Oshawa, suggests a possible reversal of long-term manufacturing declines. If Chinese electric vehicle production is established at scale, industry projections suggest the creation of tens of thousands of direct and indirect jobs over a 5 to 7 year build-out period, potentially reshaping the economic identity of communities previously reliant on legacy internal combustion platforms. However, the strategic risk for Canada remains a central concern for trade specialists. By integrating more deeply with the Chinese economy, Canada faces a potential dependency that could leave it vulnerable if Beijing chooses to recalibrate its geopolitical priorities. Furthermore, the development of Chinese-affiliated supply chains in Canada creates an existential pressure point for the American automotive industry in Detroit, which must now contend with competitors operating under North American trade credentials. This geographic proximity to the United States market, combined with Canada's access to critical minerals like lithium, positions the country as a strategic wedge within the Western Alliance. The path forward for the North American trade relationship now faces three distinct trajectories. The first scenario involves Canada successfully leveraging its new position to become the most strategically connected economy in the Western Hemisphere. The second suggests a deepening rift with Washington, where Canada remains caught between U.S. economic retaliation and shifting Chinese strategic interests. The third involves a direct response from the Trump administration, potentially involving secondary tariffs or increased economic pressure to force Ottawa to choose between its traditional security partners and new economic opportunities. As these decisions are finalized in Beijing and Washington, the impact will be felt directly by workers and consumers across the continent. For more updates on this developing story and in-depth analysis of global trade shifts, subscribe to our news service.